Welcome on in, guys. We have a huge show today, and it's almost the end of 2023. We're recording this the day after UFC 296, but obviously by the time you guys see it, it will be very close to the end of the year. And there's no more UFC events, so I think it's time to break down the Hurt Handbook's top 10 moments in combat sports 2023. Before we get into the list, man, it just give me your thoughts on this year as a whole as an MMA fan or combat sports fan.
Man, like I knew the minute you introduced me to this entire sport, of MMA, and then obviously opening up a whole world of fighting. I knew from the jump, like it's gonna be some crazy shit, and this, like being a fighter alone obviously is a whole different thing. There's only so many people that are actually willing to get in there and fight, no matter what, to get your hand raised. And so, with that being said, I was just like, I better brace myself, because there is going to be some shit, but it's going to be absolutely chaotic, and it's just, it's going to be just something that's gonna, open up something like this podcast right here. And so, this year, with that, this year just gave us so much to talk about and break down. Just like, no matter if we saw it coming or it just completely slapped us in the face, such as if we upload, an episode, and then the very next day there's, UFC and USADA are splitting up, which
Yeah.
actually happened the way that I just explained it. And so, that's what you get. That's what you get with this whole MMA media game. It's just, it's no holds barred.
And can
It's
I say this too? It's been such a crazy year, not just in the sport, but for our channel. I mean, we've had so many cool things happen this year. We had all these interviews, Ariel Helwani, Rob Font. We got to cover Aljamain Sterling, got to talk to Marab. You got to interview Sam Alvey, who's now the Karate Combat Heavyweight Champ. Pretty awesome. And I guess before we get into the top 10, little honorable mention for one of my top moments in combat sports of 2023 is the whole main card Tiz saga. So I don't know if I should just give you the floor to talk a little bit about that, but obviously the fight never ended up happening. But you already know what
I
I
mean,
think. I'm super proud of you going through that camp and
yeah,
trying to get in
man.
there.
I
But
mean, just to trace back, I guess, to how I opened this thing over here. Yeah, I just, I didn't entirely know what I was getting myself into. Like when you just introduced me to the sport and all of that, I just wanted to, hey, it's action nonstop, and I'm here for it. I think that's obviously an awesome watch, and why so many people gather to watch these huge main events that go down. And so with that, that goes for, introduce, really putting myself into, just that mindset in some way, like just during that entire training camp and whatnot, just putting myself in that mindset, like actually putting myself in these people's shoes for a second, and really just 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 appreciating it that much more, honestly. Like it really they really just it is the kind of thing that does a lot for people. Just, obviously physically what you see on, on the broadcast every weekend, and then mentally too for the fighter themselves. Like it really is, just nothing. Like there's nothing than physically imposing your will on somebody, straight up, one on one. No, no strings attached, none of that.
hey, man, this isn't a game, that's for
It's not a
sure.
game.
And let me ask you a quick question. This is obviously the MMA journalist in me coming out here, interviewing you almost, but don't feel the need to give us a set in stone answer. But will we see main card Tiz step foot in the ring maybe in 2024, or who knows, in the
Yeah,
future?
man. I'd say things have been moving and whatnot, and I want to definitely, obviously, with, now this off season, just for, for the UFC, for instance, taking place, there's not gonna be much action to be breaking down and whatnot and covering and keeping up with and all that. Yeah, man. Like the holidays and whatnot are coming up, but I really wanna find that time once again to, really just lock in again and just get back, not obviously, yeah, like the crazy training and shape I was trying to get into before, but just getting back in that feel and whatnot, and just wanting to just take that next step and like really open up something that can do a lot. So
I hope it happens, man. And it's crazy that it's almost been a year at this point, but I mean, let's hop into this because, we're obviously breaking down the past year in combat sports, our top 10 moments, and I say we just hop right in with number 10, and that is the PFL acquires Bellator. Now, this is a very recent one on the list. There's going to be some that from the beginning of the year, but this one was happened on November 20th. We kind of saw it coming. I mean, me and you had been talking about it really since the spring, it being possible. All the signs seemed to point to the PFL acquiring Bellator at some point. We just didn't know when it was going to happen. And then, November 20th hits and we get that breaking news, and it's like, okay, well, now it really happened, and now we can actually get excited about this. And it just, from day one, it just seemed like with Bellator missing out on so many free agents, then the PFL getting that Saudi investment, so that they're going to have a bunch more money coming in, and now they have the whole Bellator roster under their promotion. So, what sticks out about this to you, honestly?
yeah, pretty much how you just explained it. Like now that we can actually get excited about it, and we have a sense of direction, like true genuine direction for once for Bellator, in the sense that it's gonna be a fresh reset for all these fighters and these champions. Like you're gonna see never fights that you might never see again after they happen, and like I think that's always an occasion when the best in whatever it might be are going at it. So like yeah, it's dope that we can finally get this thing off the ground with the new year coming up, and see where it goes from there.
Are there any PFL Bellator fights like between the champions that you want to see? Because there's one in particular that I think I even talked about on this podcast that I know I'm most excited for, but I'll start with you.
Too. I mean, like, I mean, it's just, I just think the concept is honestly just so refreshing and whatnot, and like, uh, I just, yeah, pretty much. I would, we're probably gonna have, the same feeling towards it. Like, if you want to go ahead, if you want to give up the fight that it is, like,
Yeah, so
it's just,
Kayla Harrison versus Chris Cyborg has to happen in 2024. We need it. MMA fans have been wanting to see it for a long time. I know that there's like a lot of haters in MMA who don't really like Kayla Harrison. They call her, the can crusher and stuff like that. But I think for both Chris Cyborg and Kayla Harrison, this could be such a huge fight. I truly believe this would be one of the biggest fights in women's MMA history, probably only second to Cyborg versus Nunez back when that happened at UFC, I think 232. And I just want to see it. It's not often that we get these huge super fights between women's MMA fighters. Like there's a lot of great fighters, but it seems like there's usually like a clear number one and a clear number two. This is one where you truly don't know who's going to win, and it's at a weight class where we don't usually see a lot of action at 145. We made fun of it back when Amanda Nunes retired, how the 145-pound division in the UFC was, rest in peace. But now that we have a super fight in the making between Cyborg and Harrison, I would love to see it. And I think now that the PFL has acquired Bellator officially, like we were saying, now it's time to actually get excited about all these possible super fights that could happen in the future. So I'm super pumped for it. But let's move on to number 9. Speaking of super fights, in boxing now, though, we had Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence as our 9th best moment in combat sports. And this happened on July 29th. It's crazy that it's that long ago. But reason why we picked it, the obvious thing is 2 best welterweight boxers on the planet. The fight had been talked about and talked about ad nauseum, and we finally got to see it this year. And Terrence Crawford gets that huge win for his legacy. What did you think of this awesome fight, man?
The fight, the super fight that needed to happen in the boxing landscape, and it did. And I think just for the fight itself to go the way it did, just for not you'd think fights like this would be so back and forth and just down, down to the absolute nitty gritty. But this one, Terrence Crawford was leaving no crumbs on the plate here, and it was just, I think it was just, for any like, true, real diehard boxing fan, I think that was like truly like that breath of just, I don't want to say relief, like, oh, like boxing is truly like just dying and whatnot, but just like that breath of like, yes, like we finally get the fight that we've, you know, we've been clamoring for years now. Like these two have wanted it, like get it done. But obviously, with all the boxing politics that we could go on and on and on about,
Top rank.
getting in the way as usual. There's only so much like outside parties can do about that, and so we waited patiently, and obviously, like in terms of Terrence Crawford's end, like he was not he had a legacy to truly stamp, and he is, yeah,
He's the man.
One of the best champions of our time for sure.
I love it, man, because when I got into combat sports, I got into boxing before MMA, and like that was truly like my first love. And I grew up, during Mayweather, Pacquiao. Heavyweight division wasn't as crazy when we were kids, but like all those guys, Miguel Cotto, Antonio Margarito, like all those people in those like lower weight classes, and like now it's starting to feel like we're getting that again. And Crawford versus Spence, that's a fight that we needed to see, as you said. And I'm just super glad that it happened. And while a lot of people did think it was going to be back and forth, I don't think anyone was mad at the result, just because we got to watch Terrence Crawford rise to the occasion and truly make his mark on this sport and prove all the doubters wrong once and for all. And
Yeah.
honestly, too, shout out to Errol Spence, because he gave it his everything. He took the fight. A lot of boxers nowadays, they don't want to risk their careers and, the undefeated
Yeah.
records and stuff like that. So shout out to both of them for actually signing the dotted line and getting in there with each other, because that, for me, was one of the best moments in boxing this year. There's going to be one that's, in the top 10 that we're going to talk about later on. But before that, I say we get to number 8, which is the whole UFC and USADA fiasco. Now, obviously, everything on our list has been pretty positive, and even after this, everything will be positive.
Yeah.
But this one was a more negative story that we saw in MMA this year. There was a lot of drama between the UFC side of the story, the USADA side of the story. USADA seemed, as a company, seemed pretty bitter that the UFC decided to end their partnership, and they threw Conor McGregor under the bus. And we know that Conor McGregor is super polarizing. You either love him or you hate him.
Mm-mm.
But no one really deserves to get dragged through the mud like that, especially, you could assume what you want about Conor McGregor and possible PED use, but at the end of the day, he's never failed a test. So them acting like the UFC is like trying to cheat the system when that didn't even happen, I didn't really love that. But USADA's been around since 2015, and now we're going to be having Drug Free Sport International, which does the drug testing for MLB, NFL, I think. I want to say NBA, but I'm not 100% sure. I used to have it written down. I know I had it written down for the outline, but it was just such a weird time. It came out of nowhere, like you said in the beginning of the show. We had just done like a pod about the fights over the weekend, and then boom, this notification comes out on October 17th, and it's a huge deal for the sport, and especially for the UFC, because drug testing in MMA has always been a hot topic. You see guys get popped for steroids all the time. Maybe not as much anymore, but like you still do see it on, I'd say, a decently regular basis. So you wonder if the new system that the UFC is going to put in place is actually going to do better for the sport, or if it's going to be worse for the sport. But what did you make of all this, man? Because that was pandemonium when that all happened.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off of, how you ended it right there, like in the sense that is this gonna be made better for the sports because now it's gonna be easier to dope, and in that sense, like we're gonna get back to fucking, these crazy roided fights and whatnot, or it's gonna tighten things up and things are not, because I think with USADA, like, and why they would track to someone like Conor McGregor and what, like his situation obviously, been, expected to fight Mike Chandler for ages now. It's felt like, and so why they would take him and then use pretty much him as like the scapegoat, like you can't cheat the system for one guy, and then everybody has to follow suit the same way. But just like with that being said, it's just like pretty. Yeah, man. Like, I think it's hard because like we're still obviously that's not in effect yet entirely,
Yeah.
but once it is, it's like I hope I hope it's something more, just because I think with you saw like it felt very just like you know not entirely professional a lot of times, and so I think with this it's a good step in the right direction
I
for one
mean,
way or the other. But
even when it happened, we talked a lot about this, like all the things that have happened with USADA. You had the John Jones picogram situation before UFC 244, the original BMF title fight. Nate Diaz popped for, I think, something that didn't even end up mattering. And like just Sean O'Malley with the Osterine, like way back, like 2018.
mm,
Brock Lesnar before UFC 200, Nick Diaz with the marijuana suspension. Like there's just too many, and like it's hard to defend them. And they had a very interesting history in this sport. They did some good, I will say that. It seemed like doping did kind of decrease under their watch, but at the same time there were so many situations where you're just like, come on, what is going on here?
there was a
And
lot of
yeah,
loose ends, it felt like, and
exactly.
so those obviously now, with it being in effect for so long up until this point, obviously, like you know times change and whatnot, and people just adapt, and so these fighters are finding these loose ends and exposing them, and now you get the company's biggest star and use
Yeah.
him as the face of why.
To make like a PR stunt, pretty much.
Yep.
And even recently, I just remembered this, like Daniel Rodriguez, D-Rod, one of my favorite fighters in the welterweight division. He tested positive for PEDs, and then they just overturned that because it was a tainted like supplement. So like that news comes out, people think D-Rod is doping,
Hmm.
and then it comes out that he's not. But you already dragged the guy's name through the mud. It's I
Yeah.
just never enjoyed the way that they would do that, and I understand it's like disclosing it to the public so that way that there's no inside dealings between the UFC and USADA. But there were some times when they would just do that, and it would completely backfire, and it just happened on too many occasions. And kind of like you said, I think that this story isn't over, mostly because we have to see what's going to happen come 2024. But I think that this is something to definitely keep an eye on, and it was just too big of a deal to not mention. But you know, we'll see if anybody's going to be
Yeah.
on the secret
Yeah.
juice in
That.
2024.
Yeah.
But let's get to number 7, man. And this was one of my favorite parts of the year, the Islam versus Volkanovski rivalry. And it started in February, UFC 284. Lightweight champion versus featherweight champion, two of the best pound for pound fighters in the sport. And the first fight, man, it lived up to all of the hype. I remember saying before that, I think that this is one of the biggest fights that the UFC could have made, and it was super close. People argue about it to this day. It's kind of died down a little bit after the second fight, which we'll get to, but the first fight, man, just let's go back to that UFC
Yeah.
284. What were your thoughts after that fight happened?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing right there. Like, I guess we can say before the fight and then after it happened. Just like before, I think kind of just looking at it from a general landscape. I think the UFC obviously did a very good job of oh, no, actually, I think in the sense that to have it in a place like Perth, Volk's obviously stomping ground, and then you take Makhachev, who still is looking to like truly take that pound for pound title away. I think in that sense, it's like, yeah, like you're gonna get like just that electricity. It's gonna be in the air all night throughout the entire card. It's gonna buzz, for the entire fight as well. Obviously in the main event.
And it's like
And
it's not like you get a lot of fights too where both sides are like so hungry. Like they both had stuff to prove, and you don't usually see that with champions. Like, when you're the champ, you've kind of proven yourself already. Like, nobody can take that away from you ever. Like, obviously, theoretically, in the cage, you can get the belt taken away. As the great Leon Edwards says, the belt belongs to nobody. But to see two awesome champions like Islam Makhachev and Alex Volkanovski both go in there with something to prove, like you said, Islam going for that pound for pound spot and Volk trying to get his second title in another weight division. You don't see things like that often, and you don't see it happen when two fighters are in the midst of their primes. You really just did not know what was going to happen going into that first fight. And then after the first fight, you still really didn't know, because Islam won on paper, but a lot of people thought Volk won that fight. And then there was like such a heavy appetite for that rematch. And then seemingly out of nowhere,
I think
we got it.
Yeah, I think like beforehand, and the thing with, I think probably the jury's still being out perhaps on Islam Makhachev, and whereas we know like this guy Alexander Volkanovski is the greatest flyweight we've seen to this point.
Featherweight.
I
know he's like a smaller guy, but don't want to take that 20 pounds from him.
No, definitely not, especially not with Volk. But
yeah,
obviously,
he beat the shit out of us with one hand and both legs
whether
tied.
he's a fairweight or a flyweight, he beat the shit out of us.
Yeah.
But like pretty much, and then afterwards it happens, and then pretty much it just. I think you hit the nail on the head. Where it's like we're still left with like, I think like we knew we were gonna get a rematch, but obviously not as soon as it happened, and then for the rematch to go the way it did. But I think I would think that perhaps Volk was probably just a pretty comfortable favorite, and then Islam, like he's handled his business. Like you had the whole, even the fallout of the fight, like literally right after the fight happened, you had the Dan Hooker accusation with the IV, and then that creates its whole little scandal on its own, and then so we're talking about that too, and it's like, okay, now you gotta wait for like that dust to clear and settle up. But like now we've obviously fast forwarded and got already the second fight between them,
and again out of nowhere. Like we were expecting to see it was Islam versus Charles Oliveira, and then Charles Oliveira comes on Instagram, he's got that massive cut on his eyebrow, and then all of a sudden Volkanovski on 10-11 days notice pops up and he's like, I'll take the fight. And there's a lot of reasons why like I kind of enjoyed that rematch, even though obviously it wasn't the same instant classic that the first fight was. Volkanovski just as like on a personal level, talking about like the mental struggles of being an athlete at such a high level and wanting to compete, and him taking that fight because he was just too much in his own head and he needed something to work towards. And you could argue that was a big mistake, but on the other hand, I think a lot of people need to hear that. Like, not even just athletes, but just people, knowing that someone like Volkanovski, who at one point is pound for pound #1 fighter in the sport, and he deals with the same mental demons that a lot of people in this world deal with.
Yeah.
And then you go to the other side too with Islam Makhachev. Again, he kind of proved it. Like he head kicked Alexander Volkanovski in the first round. And like, it was on short notice, but Volk isn't a slouch. You know what I'm saying? Like there's not a lot of guys who would take a fight on short notice where I'm like, still is pretty close, because Volkanovski's the man. And Islam really showed up in that fight, and I think that win, like the second one, was really that moment that he needed to just prove it and just show that, I am the man. I'm #1 pound for pound. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that the fight happened. It might not have been ideal circumstances, but that rematch needed to happen one way or another. And the fact that we got both of those fights in 2023 just shows how awesome the UFC has been this year. And the fact that it's number 7 on our list shows how great the sport has been this year. But let's move on to number 6, man. And that is a huge deal. Francis Ngannou to the PFL. That happened. It's crazy to think that happened all the way back in May. And I honestly, like, there's not really much that you have to sell with this. It's the biggest MMA free agent signing, honestly, might be in history. It's definitely recent history, Starts the hype for the PFL. We had just talked about how the PFL acquired Bellator. All of these things really like built that momentum, and the Francis Ngannou signing was such a big deal because for the first time, the baddest man on the planet might not be in the UFC. Like, people argue Francis Ngannou versus John Jones, and I think that you can't be wrong either way. Until they fight, you really just don't know. But Francis Ngannou left the UFC still champion. Like,
Yeah.
and I get that they stripped him at the very end there, but it's just because, lack of activity. It's not that like he lost it in the cage. So you could argue that the best heavyweight right now is not in the UFC, which is unbelievable. And it's so great for the PFL. It started that huge momentum that was going for them in 2023. Honestly, 2023 has been such a good year for that promotion. UFC too, but the PFL, honestly, such crazy strides. I know they just hit 1 million followers on Instagram too, and it's like we're seeing them slowly build, and like they're still number 2 right now. But hey, man, this was a huge deal. But what was the first thing that popped into your mind when you saw that Francis Ngannou signed with the PFL?
Yeah, man. I think feel like a story of redemption, you could say. Just everything that Francis had to just like deal with, obviously, to get that deal done, and then the
even backtracking too, like in his life to get to a deal that big, like all the things he's overcome, the immigration stuff, sneaking from country to country to get to France and then to America, just unreal story. And this seemed to be the payoff, right?
And then the backlash, of course, too, to leave UFC as the champion with John Jones coming up to heavyweight, and then obviously having to deal with all of those remarks, like, oh, like this isn't the baddest man on the planet. He's too scared to really find out who it is, and all of that. Obviously the infamous fumble the bag entire thing. Just he really did just I feel like he defied the odds. That's something that Francis Ngannou's done just his entire life, as you mentioned, and now we get a new era in just heavyweight fighting. And I feel like that's something that really just goes to show just how heavyweight fighting just evolves. Like, it's really like that vision, of course. Obviously it's harder to get there to the top, like, than any other division that there is. And
so like every little thing could change a fight because they hit so hard, especially Francis. And it really is just almost like a crapshoot sometimes when you get near the top. And for Francis to get to where he's gotten in this sport is just remarkable. And like you mentioned too, that what all the hate that he got when he left the UFC the way he did. And honestly, like even me and you talked about it in the beginning, like we were worried. We were like, is this the right move? Because it seemed like when he left, he didn't have a particular backup plan. Like there were things that he wanted to do, and we didn't really give him the credit at first that like he could actually get these things done. And now, signed with the PFL, fought Tyson Fury, as we'll get to, hint, hint. And it's just amazing. And like Francis Ngannou has truly proved everybody wrong in 2023. And him signing to the PFL was really the start of all of that. And it was big for himself, and it was huge for the PFL as a promotion. So just an amazing story, honestly, from this year. But let's get to the halfway point, number 5. And for that, we picked Sean O'Malley defeats Aljamain Sterling at UFC 292 to win the UFC bantamweight title, and more importantly, truly living up to the hype that the UFC and all the fans gave him. And it's just an amazing story because, we got a closer look at it too because we went to Aljo's open workout in Long Island. That was super fun to cover. Definitely watch some of that coverage if you haven't. And, we were going into that fight knowing that Aljo was supremely confident. Sean O'Malley was supremely confident. And it was just like, can this guy who the UFC has been propping up this whole time, can he deliver here? Like, this is it. There's nothing that the UFC can do for him now. They gave him the fight, and it's up to Sean O'Malley to execute and prove all of his doubters wrong. And that's exactly what he did, because the first round of that fight, I remember, was pretty even. It was kind of a chess match, feeling each other out. And then very early on in round 2, O'Malley hits Aljo with that clean right hand. And it's just amazing. It was such an electric moment there in Boston. The arena, when he dropped him, erupted. And then when the stoppage happened too, it got even louder. And it just feels like we finally got to see one of the biggest stars in the sport have that moment. Like, you remember McGregor Aldo back at UFC 194. Like, it reminded me of that. It felt like one of those huge moments in the sport that we're going to be talking about from years to come, depending on what happens in O'Malley's future. I mean, obviously he's going to be fighting Chito Vera next year, which is crazy. I can't wait for that rematch. But what was your initial thought when O'Malley finally broke through and delivered on that hype?
Yeah, I think it's something that, a lot of people just unfairly discrediting Sean O'Malley just because of how he looks and, the things he says and whatnot, and just like, you know, mistaking him just to be, he's just a social media fighter. Like, he's just, he's not actually one of the best here. Like, he's a fraud, yada yada. He doesn't beat Cheeto. Cheeto doesn't break his foot, or the other way around. You'd like,
The peroneal nerve thing you're
yeah,
talking about.
yeah, and
It's
then
crazy how many like lower body injuries O'Malley had in like the beginning, because he did break his foot at one point. I think that was like the Andrei Sukumtov fight way back. It's just crazy, like all the doubters that he shut up with that fight, and like it's just cool. Like, I love watching someone who's so confident in themselves from day one when really no one else is, finally get to that spot and really just, like I keep saying, just shut everybody up.
It's awesome to see a guy, entirely in his prime, just beating the best, and now we're gonna see that Cheeto rematch again, and now he's he's the target, and like he's no longer the prospect trying to rise up, or and now and Cheeto too has obviously come a long way in his own right, and so it's dope to see, and it's yeah, I think Sean O'Malley, like, he's still feel like this. I feel like it's a guy that, and when I want to circle back to what I said before about a guy like him getting discredited a lot. I think it's got the complete opposite. The guy goes in there, the octagon every single time with a complete purpose, like a complete drive and will to just finish the guy in front of him, and he obviously has done an awesome job of that throughout his entire career, and now we get championship reign. So
Exactly, and he's defeated. Like, now you can't even shit on his opponents, because I mean, he's beaten Piotr Jan and Aljamain Sterling now. Obviously, two huge names in the recent history at bantamweight, and it's, like I said, I'm almost speechless. It's pretty amazing, but excuse me. So I think with that, we'll move to number 4. And number 4 is kind of a twofer, but we figured we'd combine them just because they kind of tie in with each other. But Israel Adesanya defeating Alex Pereira at UFC 287 in April, which obviously gave Izzy the belt back, which led to UFC 293 in September, which was originally going to be Izzy versus Duplessis. Duplessis had to pull out with the injury. Sean Strickland steps in on short notice, and nobody gave him a chance at winning that fight. And then Sean Strickland proves all of the doubters wrong, kind of like we were talking about with O'Malley, and he defeats a legend in Israel Adesanya, and at his own game on the feet. So I guess we'll start with Izzy and Pereira, because that's kind of where it begins in April. Obviously Alex was the middleweight champion, had defeated Izzy back in November of 22, and this fight gets booked, and we're like, what's going to happen here? Because Izzy has never defeated this guy. And then the fight, honestly, like, it wasn't really going his way at first. He was getting hit with a lot of leg kicks, and they seemed like they were really doing damage. But Izzy's fight IQ is amazing. Like, the way that he played possum and then landed that knockout, dude, was just phenomenal.
That's the crazy thing too. Like, there's no halftime when it comes to this. Like, you only get the amount of time that you get in your corner talking to your coaches, and then obviously it's all you for 25 minutes. And so you just know, just straight off that, like, coming into the fight, like, yeah, Adesanya is a different kind of guy, but this guy across him, obviously, like, he has his number. And so how is he going to adjust throughout, like, now that he's the one fighting for the title and not defending it? There was your answer there.
Yeah, and for Izzy to overcome that, just losing to a guy 3 times in different disciplines too, that has to mess with your confidence. And I know that Izzy is very, like, outgoing, and he's a very confident guy, but again, fighters, a lot of times they can have that bravado and still inside be a bit nervous, and I don't want to say scared, but then you do hear fighters talk about, like, if you're not scared, you're just lying. And I would imagine that Izzy came into that fight really wondering what was going to happen, because if you lose again, that's the fourth time and you're not getting another shot after that. And for him to do it in the emphatic way that he did, and then that celebration with the bow and arrow above Pereira's unconscious body, obviously was just insane. And then, you know, he defeated his biggest rival in the sport, and then for him to move on, have this huge rivalry with DDP, and we think that that fight's going to happen, and then it all of a sudden is taken from us, and then we get Sean Strickland in there, and everybody loves Sean Strickland, but we were like, I don't know if he beats Izzy, because remember what happened when Strickland fought Alex. It did not look very good at all, but it seemed like Strickland improved so much since then, and his style just ruined Izzy's game plan. He could not counter him. Sean just walked him down the whole fight, cut off the cage, and it was just one of the best championship upsets I think I've ever seen, because I cannot think of one person besides maybe Sean's camp. And even Sean's camp was saying, you know, Sean has to be perfect to win this fight, and he did that. The Philly shell, that weird, awkward movement, it was just amazing. And a lot of people who have trained with Strickland, they talk about the first time you spar with him, that's exactly how it looks. It's a style that you really have to learn and deal with. And I just can't, I still can't believe that happened, honestly. It's crazy to me that Sean Strickland is a UFC champion right now. I'm super glad that he is, but let me ask you this. Out of the two fights, which one was the crazier result to you?
Man, that's a good question.
It's tough. I don't even know, honestly.
Yeah, I think I would just say, you know, the Izzy knockout, really. I mean, just that, I just think, yeah, just to circle back, like, you know, for him to capitalize on that fight IQ of his, and to make those adjustments, and then bounce back in that way, and get that feeling of vindication as stand over Pierre's body, finally victorious.
Sorry to cut you off. Like, one of the most iconic moments in recent UFC history, for sure. Like, that photo of him with really, going like that, it's amazing. It truly was amazing.
It really did put the stamp on one of the greatest fighting rivalries we've ever seen. So
yeah, you can make a movie about their rivalry. Like, when you listen to Alex talk about Izzy, you know, how he had like a drinking problem in Brazil after his kickboxing career, and he heard Izzy talk about him all the way back in like 2018 or 2019. And that was what motivated him to get back on the horse. He's like, I'm going to come back and beat this guy. And then he did. And then for him to rematch Izzy,
it's wild, man.
It's been amazing.
You got Izzy, who's literally at like the top. Like, Alex Pereira is one of the last people he's thinking of, and Pereira is just he's quietly waiting in the wind. And it's like, he doesn't realize it yet, but I'm going to be the one to take that title off of him.
And then after that, Israel Adesanya's star is at an all-time high. He fights Sean Strickland, and then he loses. Like, this is how awesome MMA is. Like, you truly just never know. It's unbelievable. It really is unbelievable. But those three guys at middleweight, Poatan, Izzy, and Sean Strickland, they provided some great moments for the fans this year. And I think that'll kind of bring us right into number 3 on the list. Alex Pereira defeats Yuri Prochazka at UFC 295 to win a second UFC title in another weight class in just his 7th UFC fight. Just unreal, man. He is something else. I mean, I just talked about it, how the determination that you have to get to where Poatan has gotten in such a short amount of time. And then UFC 295 was originally supposed to be Jones-Stipe, and then that gets canceled, and this gets bumped up to the main event. And then, like, all hardcore MMA fans are like, I cannot wait, because these two guys are just pure violence. You knew it was going to be just a crazy fight. And for as long as it lasted, it really was. And then, you know, at the very end, well, not the very end, you know, in terms of 5 rounds, but the end of the fight, round 2, Alex gets that guillotine, and that was a wrap. And then, boom, he's a 2-division champion. Obviously not, you know, double champ at once, but there's not a lot of people in UFC history who have won multiple titles in multiple divisions. It's not easy to do whatsoever, but I think Alex has really found his home at 205, and both of his wins now at that weight class are against two former champions, which is even crazier to think about. But hey, man, I'll give you the floor. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think for someone to be only 7 fights in and to go up a weight class to a weight class as volatile as light heavyweight has been and become the champion there as well, over a former champion, like it really does just like write itself about the kind of like just the kind of specimen that UFC was able to get and Alex Pereira. Like he really has fought nothing but the best ever since he's stepped foot in the door, and the fans have we've all gravitated towards it. It's been so much fun to watch, and he's really just getting started. I think it's just now obviously all the turmoil that light heavyweight has gone through for a guy to come up and now in his first fight, because we saw with Adesanya too, obviously, who came before Pereira, in the sense that, like, obviously Izzy's still the middleweight champ at the time, but to move up the weight class and take on the champion, he couldn't get it done one way or another, and now
Alex fights him like he fights Jan Blachowicz.
Yep.
It could not be more like a full circle type thing, and then he wins that fight. I remember it was a little controversial at the time. We did talk about it. It was very close, but then when you fight Yuri and you finish him like that, you can't doubt a guy like that anymore. You have 2 wins now over former champions at 205, and your only fights at 205, and this seems like it's his natural weight class at this point. But let me ask you this. I don't know really who beats Alex at 205 right now. Do you have any, like, indication on that?
I see, man, like that style of kickboxing, I think, what it brings to a division like that, obviously combined with the size that Alex Pereira brings to the division. Like this probably always been his natural weight class, but he was able to make it work in middleweight. Now he's back here.
He was like, I gotta beat Izzy. He's like, I need to show this guy who's boss.
And now to make the transition, I think it's creating, because I think we're seeing the middleweight too. It was like yeah, like that was it. Like it's Izzy, or it's essentially like nobody, because we weren't seeing that many like guys that could fight realistically, like give Alex Pereira a fight, that would thrust him into that title picture. And so now we're at this division, and where there's never been a question about the depth with light heavyweight. It's just now you bring Poatan into the fold as the champion. It creates a lot of awesome dream fights that I'm hoping we can see soon, and just for us to what we've seen already with the guy.
I mean, I just love when a star is the champion. Like, and Alex is a star. I know that he doesn't speak much English, but like that doesn't matter. MMA fans, like you said, have gravitated towards this guy, and rightfully so, because it's been just a crazy run. And I think I even said this when we did the pod after he won at UFC 295. It has to be the craziest starting run to UFC career that we've ever seen. Maybe like Brock Lesnar, you could argue, but I don't think that he fought the same level of competition as Alex has fought so far. I mean, think about it. At 205, like I said, he's defeated 2 former champions. And then even at middleweight, before he was ranked, he fights Sean Strickland, who's the current UFC middleweight champion, and he starched him. Man. It's amazing what this guy has done. He's one of my favorite fighters in the sport, and I think that he has the potential to hold that belt for a while. And it's been like hot potato sometimes at light heavyweight, but right now we have a legit superstar as the champion there, and who knows what's going to happen next with him. But let's move on to number 2. Huge moment, and we kind of teased this before, but Francis Ngannou versus Tyson Fury, and more specifically, that moment that everyone saw on social media. Tyson Fury dropped by Francis Ngannou in that fight. Never would have thought that was going to happen. Similarly to when Strickland fought Adesanya, not a lot of people gave Francis Ngannou much of a chance. And for him to only lose that fight via split decision, controversially too, not like it's like a split decision where everybody kind of agrees. Like this is a very, very close fight between arguably the best MMA heavyweight on the planet versus the best heavyweight boxer on the planet. And we've never seen anything like that. Like even when Conor fought Floyd, Conor looked good for like a couple rounds, but Floyd won the fight pretty handily in the end. This fight was not like that at all. It was super close from beginning to end. Each round, you really couldn't even get like a good idea of who won it. And you could say like Francis really did more damage on Tyson than Tyson did on Francis. And that speaks to just how much MMA has evolved, how good Francis is. And it was just a great moment this year. And I kind of agree with Chael Sonnen, like when he said on the MMA Hour that like before this fight happened, it didn't feel as big because you kind of figured that Fury was just going to walk through him. Mm-hmm. But then in hindsight, after this fight happens, you're like, wow, that was one of the craziest moments of 2023. But honestly, like when you saw on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, the picture of Tyson Fury on his butt and Francis Ngannou standing over him, like what were you even thinking? Because like I remember I was like, oh my god, I cannot believe that just happened.
Yeah, it's just similar, dude, in the sense that like I once I got over that like complete just like shock, like oh my god, like it actually happened, like this isn't a freaking AI generated photo right here. Like Francis Ngannou proved his worth against the greatest heavyweight of all time. And so pretty much when I was able to take a step back and then like, just keep, the more and more you look at the picture and stuff, it's like, man, it's like it really is just goes to that redemption story that Francis just continues to build. Like this uphill battle that he's continued to climb and whatnot. It was just, like we got the PFL deal done, and now from the jump, the first order of business is fighting Tyson Fury for the freaking belt. And like
not for the belt.
Well, that would have been crazy. That is what it freaking felt like, man. That is what it freaking felt like. And it's like at some point, it won't be. It's just at some point. It's at some point like we probably will see Francis and Ngannou fighting for I don't whether it's a boxing belt or it's a PFL belt. Like
I think both can happen. I mean, right now he's ranked in the top 10 of the WBC.
Saying, dude. Like this, it's like, yeah, man. I'm really just trying to like put out there like how real it is now. Like how just like this guy is truly like he's taken over the combat sports world. So
it's just amazing. And before we go to number one, I actually want to ask you this because you said this and I was like in my head, I'm like, that's a hot take. You called Tyson Fury the greatest heavyweight of all time. That's a hot take. I still think it's Ali or Lennox Lewis, personally.
Oh,
but
anyway. I would say I just think for our time essentially, just like I've never this is pretty Tyson Fury is like
I mean Fury.
Muhammad Ali, so
when I think of Fury, like I still think of back when he beat Vladimir Klitschko, who I mentioned before how when we were kids, like it was the lower weight classes that were bigger because at heavyweight. Vladimir Klitschko is like the champ for most of that time. And then Tyson Fury was the guy who finally broke through and beat him. And it's kind of crazy now that we saw Francis Ngannou almost kind of do the same thing. Like Tyson Fury has looked unbeatable at times. And this is against guys like Deontay Wilder and like real top boxers in the heavyweight division. And Francis Ngannou in his like first professional boxing fight. It's crazy like when you look at his like boxing reference page, it's 0-1 and it's a split decision loss to Tyson freaking Fury. Like that's just insane to me. And like I said, it's number 2 for a reason. It's one of the most iconic moments in combat sports. I think that this one will last the test of time. And like you said, I think Francis' star is only going to rise from here because proving yourself in a moment like that is just unbelievable. But without further ado, let's get to number 1. I feel like a lot of people in their heads are like, are these guys really forgetting this moment? No, we haven't. Number 1, John Jones wins the heavyweight title versus Ciryl Gane at UFC 285 back in March. And honestly, this list has been crazy, but how could you pick anything else for number 1, man? I mean, John Jones has been one of the greatest, if not the greatest, MMA fighter in history leading up to this fight. And we were all kind of saying this would be the thing that puts him over the top. And it's like you can't argue anymore if John Jones somehow gets this done after such a long layoff and all the hype behind it. And I remember, dude, I watched the fight again today. The atmosphere in that arena, dude, was so electric, and
Yeah.
everybody really wanted Jones to win. And for him to do it in the first round via guillotine, emphatic way to get that heavyweight title. And obviously, Tom Aspinall is become the interim champion in the meantime because Jones sadly got hurt. But hey, man, you can't take anything away from that performance in March. It was such a great moment in MMA. Watching John hop up on the cage after he finished him and just like taking it in. He did it. Like, we heard about it for years and years. We saw him bulk up. So much hype behind it, and we finally get to see him break through and win that title and honestly become probably the greatest of all time. But let me ask you, man, like when that happened, what was like your initial thought?
So I honestly, John Jones is like true prime, I would say, in which he really is like beating legends while he's writing his own legend. I still was like, not I was aware of John Jones, but not aware of how like huge of a star John Jones really truly was. And so now that, once I do finally like actually indulge myself into the sport and whatnot, it's like how could you not pay attention to a John Jones? Well, and that happens when the guy has cleaned out the entire light heavyweight division. He's seemingly like bored with the division now.
Literally vacated the title. He's like, nah, I'm good. I'm not fighting anybody anymore.
Exactly, vacates the title, and then you have the whole scramble for it. So now when we get to this point, it's like not only do you factor in John Jones being gone from just being in the octagon
Basically,
for like
3 years he was out. And to also say this, because you mentioned light heavyweight, like in that 3 years, there was never like a true dominant champion after him. And there still hasn't been. So in that 3 years where John Jones didn't even fight, that just proves again how great he is because the belt got passed around so many times. And, we had that video back in November. Check that out if you haven't. Shameless self-plug. But it was just such an incredible moment for him to finally get to that fight and to fight someone like Ciryl Gane, who me and you have obviously spoken highly about over the past couple of years, and to do it like that. And I get that Ciryl Gane is not the best grappler in that division, but how many other people have done that to him?
Exactly,
it's insane.
Man. To return to the heavyweight division for the first time, like I think I want to reference back to what I said before about the division, how it's been able to evolve the way it has because we see a guy like Ciryl Gane and Tom Aspinall, like they bring this more agile, technical style to the division. Like now, on Ciryl Gane's end, it's like, well, you're facing, this guy is vying for GOAT status in all of MMA, and you were the guy that's been here in this division, racking up the wins and whatnot over, fellow ranked fighters in the division. Like it really brings like this just a crazy conversation on Ciryl Gane, and it's like just no one. It's not that like
fighting the GOAT,
as if he has like nothing to lose pretty much, but like obviously everything to gain, and it's like, yeah, man, it's just you can't like. I just really did take all of us just like, but also reminded us like this is why this guy is here and on this stage and getting, why everyone stops what they're doing to tune in to watch him fight because he does things like this to guys like Ciryl Gane.
I think that layoff too made MMA fans truly appreciate just how great he was back at 205 because the run that he went on, I truly don't know if we'll ever see anything like that again. And if we do, I don't think it'll be anytime soon, honestly, because just to beat all the guys that Jones beat at 205, to take the 3-year layoff, and then, like you said, to come back against a guy who has beaten a lot of the top contenders at heavyweight. And, like, the dude's a problem, man. He's super quick, super agile. and you just can't beat John Jones, and no one has solved that puzzle. There's been people who've gotten close, Gustafson, Dominic Reyes, but Surreal Gone just could not do anything in there against John Jones. He just got folded pretty much super quickly with that guillotine, and it was just amazing to me. And like, John Jones is the guy who got me into the sport back when he had the rivalry with DC. So like, to see him get that huge win, arguably could be the biggest win of his career in a career with a bunch of big wins. It's just unbelievable. Great for the sport.
A guy he's just truly mastered the sport of MMA in every single sense of the word. And that is something to always pay attention to when you get the chance to, when he's fighting. It's like, damn, obviously, one way or another, the fight with Stipe would have made this list for sure. But obviously that didn't come to fruition this year, and so
it speaks also to how great that John Jones is, that he's probably going to be out until like at least middle of 2024, and there's not even a conversation to take that title away. And he's earned it though. Like, I think he's earned it. Because like, I understand Tom Aspinall's point about like, look, if he's not fighting, I need to be fighting Stipe, or like something needs to happen in between here.
Exactly.
But like, when you really think about it, like, Tom Aspinall has every right to feel that way, but John Jones has earned it, man. It's not often that you see the GOAT as the current champion. Like, it's unreal, because you usually, when you think about like the GOAT, it's usually like after everything's said and done, and you're like, okay, well, now his career's over. Yeah, he's probably the GOAT. John Jones is like the reigning heavyweight champion. Like, his legacy like can still be added to, which is unreal to think about, man. This was, like I said, to me, this was always the top moment of 2023. Right when he won that title, I was like, this is going to be number one. Like, you just know it. Anything can happen. But it's not often that you see a guy who's as great as John Jones, off of such a layoff, do something that spectacular.
Yeah.
And he truly, like I said, he did it in spectacular fashion. It's not like he just beat Surreal Gone, ran right through him, and now he's the champ, and we'll see what's going to happen with him in 2024. But in general, this has been such a crazy year in the sport, and I've enjoyed covering it with you, man. We've had such good times.
Crazy trip to go down in one recording.
For real.
Say that.
And we know this is like a bit of a longer pod, but we do hope that you guys have enjoyed it, and kind of like enjoyed going down memory lane with us, because I don't know about you, man, I've really enjoyed just going back and rewatching all of these things.
There was really no shortage of things to talk about.
Yeah. And we talked about this before the pod too, like, when you're covering the sport like the way that we do week by week, it's kind of hard sometimes to take a look in the rearview mirror. And we're getting towards the end of the year now, and UFC 296 has passed, and we have a few weeks. And you go back and you watch some of these moments, and you're like, I can't believe this all happened in 2023. Yeah. And it just gets you super excited for 2024. And we hope that you guys have enjoyed our content this year. Hope you stick with us, because 2024 is hopefully going to be an even better year in the sport for the Hurt Handbook. We hope we're going to be doing some bigger and better things, and I hope you join us for the ride. So we'll see y'all.